A $190 million container ship, 14 minutes from grounding on the bar. Then a ferry captain stepped off the gangway, his 6-year-old son clutching a brass compass charm. The heiress sneered, "Grandpa's speed, replace him for the next sailing." 14 minutes later, the Harbormaster was calling his burner phone. Tamsin Vance had inherited her father's shipping conglomerate 11 months ago. She arrived at Harborside Terminal at 5:41 with 2 influencers and a ring light, expecting only the kind of dawn footage her PR team had asked for. Then she saw him at the wheelhouse window, his hands steady on the bronze rim, eyes fixed on the fog line off Crescent Bar. His son beside him in the doorway, a brass compass charm hanging from a leather string in one small fist. She crossed the wet steel deck in 14 strides. She did not knock. She did not introduce herself. She simply arrived. In front of the deckhand, the mate, and 2 influencers filming live, she ended his employment. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not mention the docking he had just completed in a 3-knot crosswind. He took his son's hand and walked down the gangway into the fog. What no one on that ferry knew was that the man she had just fired held the only master 1,600-ton license within 200 nautical miles. Stay with this one. It earns it. To understand what happened in those 14 minutes, you have to go back to 5:38 that morning, when the fog off Crescent Bay was still the color of cold steel. The harbor smelled of diesel and salt and the wet rope of the bumper lines. Gulls did not cry yet. The water was the kind of gray that swallowed everything above it. Owen Bram had walked the dock before sunrise for 2 years and 7 months. He knew the sound of every cleat under his boot. He knew which plank near slip 3 had a soft heart. He knew the exact angle the morning ferry would lean when the south swell came up under the keel. He was 52 years old. He was broad in the shoulders and quiet in the hands, with the particular calm of a man who had stood watch in worse weather than most men ever saw. His coffee was in a metal thermos his wife had owned. His son was holding the back of his coat with 2 fingers, the way a small boy holds onto a thing that might walk away. The fog moved against the hull of the ferry like a slow breath, and Owen turned his face into it the way another man might turn into a sermon. The Harborside Ferry ran the commuter route between Crescent Bay and the mainland terminal at Port Elwood. 8 crossings a day, 3-knot tidal pull at the bay mouth, a working boat carrying nurses and dock cooks and high school kids. It was, by any honest measure, the kind of route a man with Owen's papers should not have been driving. Owen Bram held a United States Coast Guard Master 1,600-ton license. He had been a Panama Canal pilot for 9 years before he came home. He had brought a Panamax bulk carrier through the Miraflores locks in a wet squall with 31 centimeters of clearance on the starboard side. He had docked the MV Hesperian Star at Manzanillo in a 40-knot crosswind without scraping a fender. None of that was on the schedule taped inside the ferry wheelhouse. What was on the schedule was a 6:33 departure, a 7:04 arrival, and a $4 cup of coffee. Owen took the route because Hannah had died 2 years ago, in July, and Isaac was 4 when his mother went, and a man who pilots cargo ships through the canal does not pick up a 6-year-old from kindergarten at 3:15. Isaac was 6. He had his mother's straight, dark hair and his father's quiet way of watching a room before he stepped into it. He carried a small brass compass charm on the leather string, knotted twice at his neck. The charm was the size of a coin. The needle still floated. The brass had begun to dull along the edge where his thumb rubbed it. Hannah had bought it the afternoon she came home from the clinic with the diagnosis. On the same day, she sat at the kitchen table and said the word breast cancer out loud for the first time. She had bought it before she told them. She had put it in Isaac's hand and said, "This is so you can always find North." He had been 4. He had not known yet what North was. He knew now. He held it the way other boys held a phone or a baseball card. He held it in his sleep. The leather string had been knotted twice by Hannah's hands and once by Owen's after the first knot loosened. The third knot was the father's. The boy did not know yet that the third knot was the father's. He would, one day. For now, the compass was simply a thing that meant his mother's hand. Mrs. Esquivel lived in the apartment below them. She was 68, a retired hospital cafeteria cook, and she watched Isaac from 3:15 to 6 on the days Owen had the late ferry. On the dawn shifts, Isaac came with him. School did not begin until 8:40. The ferry returned to Harborside at 7:52. Owen had timed it the way he timed everything. He brought Isaac aboard before the passengers boarded. He set the boy on the high seat at the back of the wheelhouse, the one bolted to the bulkhead, with a thermos of warm milk and a small striped blanket. Isaac watched his father work. Isaac did not interrupt. Isaac had learned, the way children of quiet men learn, that the wheelhouse was a kind of church. Owen did not explain this. He did not have to. The boy understood the way the radio crackled and stopped. He understood the way his father's eyes moved across the bay without moving his head. He understood that fog was a thing his father knew the inside of. Some mornings, Isaac fell asleep against the bulkhead with the brass compass in his fist. The Harborside acquisition had closed 11 months ago. Vance Maritime, a third-generation shipping conglomerate out of New York, had bought the ferry line as a tax shelter sweetener on a larger container deal. None of the new owners had ever stood on a deck. None of them had ever seen the ferry. The crew kept the schedule, the deckhands kept the lines, the captains kept the licenses. The new ownership kept the spreadsheet. That was the arrangement, until that morning. Tamsin Vance was 31. She had inherited the operating chair of Vance Maritime when her father steps down to manage his charitable foundation, which mostly meant his second marriage. She had never held a wheel. She had a degree in brand strategy. She had a podcast about women in logistics that had aired 4 episodes. She had agreed, against her communications director's mild protest, to ride the 6:33 ferry that morning with 2 lifestyle influencers and a videographer, for content. The content was supposed to be soft. Dawn, coffee, a founder waving from a bow. Something for the company quarterly. She had not slept much. She was not in a generous mood. The fog at the mouth of Crescent Bay that morning was thicker than the forecast had called for. The marine layer had settled at sea overnight and had not lifted with the dawn. Visibility off the breakwater was under 100 yards. The tide was falling. The ebb was running at 2.5 knots and would build to 3.5 by 7. Across the bar at the bay mouth, the current pulled to the southeast in a curl the locals called the spine. A man who did not know the spine could put a hull onto the bar without ever feeling the boat take the current. Owen knew the spine. He knew it the way he knew the back of his own hand. He had drawn it once on a paper napkin for the new mate, a young man named Dmitri, 6 months into the job. Dmitri had folded the napkin and put it in his wallet. Owen had nodded once and not mentioned it again. The fog that morning was not, by Owen's reading, the kind of fog that would lift by 8. It was the kind of fog that would sit on the bar until noon and hide a problem under itself the whole time. Owen ran his pre-departure check the way he had run it 3,091 times before. He walked the deck. He checked the bumper lines. He tested the starboard engine bell at the wheelhouse. He confirmed the chart plotter. He stood for a moment at the bow rail with his bare palm flat against the wet steel and listened to the way the hull breathed against the dock. The boat told him things. The boat had always told him things. The boat that morning was telling him the south swell had picked up half a foot since midnight, and the bar would be running thicker than usual. He felt it in the way the bumpers groaned. He felt it in the way the cleat under his left boot took the weight differently than it had the morning before. None of this was on the schedule. None of this was on the manifest. None of this would have made sense to anyone who had not stood on a deck for 30 years. Owen returned to the wheelhouse. He nodded to Dmitri. He sat his son in the high seat. He started the engines at 5:56. At 6:12, Isaac asked his father a question. He asked it the way small boys ask questions, looking at the brass compass and not at the man. He said, "Dad, why does the needle never go to sleep?" Owen did not answer right away. He waited the length of one swell. He waited the way men who have heard better questions than they could answer learn to wait. Then he said, "Because the earth is always pulling on it." Isaac thought about that. He turned the compass over in his hand. He said, "Even at night?" Owen said, "Even at night." Isaac said, "Even when nobody is looking?" Owen said, "Especially when nobody is looking." Isaac put the compass back against his small chest. He fell quiet. The fog moved past the wheelhouse window in slow, gray ribbons. Dmitri, at the chart plotter, did not look up, but his hand on the rail had gone still. He had heard the exchange. He would remember it later in the inquiry, in the way a man remembers a thing he did not understand he was a witness to. Tamsin Vance boarded at 6:18 with her two influencers, a videographer in a puffer vest and a communications assistant named Reeve. They came up the gangway in a loose cluster. The influencers were already filming. They were narrating, in that particular tone influencers use, the experience of, quote, slow living on the water. Tamsin wore a camel coat and a wool watch cap that she had bought the night before at the airport. She had her hands in her pockets. She had not introduced herself to the crew. She had not asked where the bridge was. She had walked directly to the bow, where the videographer set up the ring light. She glanced once at the wheelhouse window, registered an older man inside with what she assumed was his grandson, and looked away. She would not, by her own later account, have remembered seeing them at all if not for what happened next. The ferry pulled away from the dock at 6:33 on the minute. Owen kept the wheel steady through the harbor markers. He brought the speed up to 9 knots clear of the breakwater. The fog opened around the bow. Halfway across the bay, the south swell came up under the keel the way Owen had felt it coming. The ferry rolled 4 degrees to port and steadied. The influencer at the bow, who had been doing a slow, handheld pan, lost her footing for half a second and laughed it off for the camera. Tamsin, beside her, did not laugh. She had felt the roll. She had felt the way the deck moved under her boot in a way her townhouse floor did not move. She frowned. She looked back toward the wheelhouse. She watched the older man at the wheel for the length of 3 breaths. She did not like, she would say later, the way he was, quote, taking his time. She did not understand that what she had seen was a master pilot reading a swell at the exact moment it arrived under his boat. She mistook competence for slowness. It is a mistake that costs other people a great deal more than the person making it. The approach to Port Elwood ran along the lee of a low spit and into a narrow channel between 2 breakwaters. The dock was on the inside, set 90 degrees off the channel, which meant the ferry had to pivot through a tight turn in the last 100 yards. That morning, with the ebb running and a 3-knot crosswind out of the southwest, the turn was a working pilot's turn. Owen brought the bow around at the marker. He gave the starboard engine a controlled burst. He let the stern walk 1 boat length to port. He set the bumper line edge on the dock face at 4 inches of clearance. The hull kissed the rubber. The dock did not move. The bumper did not groan. The deckhand stepped off without lurching. It was a textbook landing in a working crosswind by a man who had landed the same boat in the same wind 1,043 times before. Tamsin Vance was at the bow with the ring light when the kiss happened. She did not see it. She felt the small bump and frowned again. She turned to the videographer and said, on camera, that it had been, quote, the longest ferry ride of her life. She walked back to the wheelhouse with the videographer in tow. She did not knock. She opened the door. Owen was logging the arrival in the bound notebook he kept beside the chart plotter. Isaac was still in the high seat with the striped blanket on his lap. Tamsin saw the boy. She saw the thermos. She saw the man in the Navy work jacket with a notebook in his hand and a 6-year-old behind him. The videographer was still rolling. The two influencers crowded into the doorway behind Tamsin. Reeve stayed on the dock. He had been with the company longer than Tamsin and had a wife who had once worked a fishing boat. He understood, the way Tamsin did not, what he was looking at. He said nothing. He stayed on the dock. Tamsin said into the wheelhouse, in a voice pitched for the camera and not for Owen, "We're going to need someone with a little more pace. Grandpa Speed isn't the brand. Get me a replacement for the next sailing." The wheelhouse went quiet. Dimitri did not move. Owen closed the notebook. Isaac was watching his father. He was watching the small movements of his father's hands. He had set the brass compass on his small lap and was holding it there with both palms, the way he held a wounded bird he had once found behind their apartment building. He did not speak. He did not cry. He understood, the way children of quiet men understand, that something had just happened that his father would not explain on the boat. Owen turned to Tamsin. He did not raise his voice. He did not produce his license. He did not mention the docking he had just completed. He said, "Understood, ma'am." He set the notebook in its slot. He turned to Dimitri and asked him, in a voice low enough that the camera did not catch it, to log the end-of-watch entry. Dimitri nodded. His jaw was tight. Owen reached for his son's hand. Isaac slid down off the high seat. He held the compass against his chest with one hand and his father's hand with the other. They walked past Tamsin without looking at her. They walked down the gangway into the fog. Reeve, on the dock, watched them pass. He did not say a word. He noted internally the time on the clock above the ticket booth. He noted the way Owen carried his thermos. He noted that the small boy was holding something brass and small in his hand and was not looking back at the ferry. Reeve had been the one, 11 months ago, to draft Tamsin's onboarding brief. He had given her a folder with the operational structure of the line, the licensed pilots, and the Harbormaster contacts. He knew, because he had typed it himself, that the man walking down the gangway with the small boy was the only master 1,600-ton license holder on the company's roster between San Francisco and the Mexican border. He had said this to Tamsin on her second day. She had skimmed the folder for 41 seconds and asked him to make the print larger next time. He had not raised the subject again. He thought of raising it now. He looked at the videographer's camera, still rolling. He decided he would raise it in the Harbormaster's office, and not on tape. Owen and Isaac walked along the dock toward the small parking lot at the end of the terminal. The fog was lifting 1 degree above the water, which meant a man could see his own boots, but not the bow of a boat 50 feet out. Owen did not speak. Isaac did not speak. They reached the truck. Owen unlocked the passenger side. He helped Isaac in. He buckled the small boy's belt across his chest. The brass compass was still in Isaac's right fist, knuckles pale. Owen closed the door gently. He walked around the front of the truck. He climbed into the driver's seat. He sat with his hands on the wheel for the length of 3 breaths. He did not start the engine. Isaac said, in the small voice he used for difficult questions, "Did the lady not like the boat?" Owen looked at his son. He said, "The lady didn't know the boat yet." Isaac thought about that. He said, "Will she know it later?" Owen said, "Maybe." Then he started the engine. He pulled out of the parking lot at 6:52. He did not yet know the ship was coming. Hannah had taught Isaac to find north on a Tuesday afternoon in the kitchen, 4 months before she died. She had been 39. The chemotherapy had taken her hair the second time. She had not bothered with the scarf at home that day. She had her elbows on the kitchen table and the brass compass flat between them, and Isaac had been on her lap with one of his hands inside her sleeve. She had told him, "This end always points to the same place." She had told him, "It doesn't matter where you are." She had told him, "It doesn't matter if it's dark, or if you're scared, or if everyone else is pointing the other way." She had told him, "This end goes to north." She had said the word north slowly enough for him to repeat it. He had repeated it. He had said, "North." And she had smiled the way she only smiled at him, with one corner of her mouth higher than the other. She had closed his fingers around the compass and said, "So now you can always find me." He had been 4. He had not understood yet what she was saying. At 6:54, while Owen was driving along the Spit Road with Isaac in the passenger seat, the MV Coral Erin was inbound to Port Elwood from the west at 6.5 knots. The Coral Erin was a Panamax container vessel under Vance Maritime charter, with a hold capacity of 4,800 TEU and a declared cargo value of $190 million. She was 3 hours behind schedule out of Long Beach. Her master was a Greek pilot named Nicholas Pavlidis, with 22 years on the bridge and no working knowledge of Crescent Bay. He had taken the bar at 6:51 on a heading he had been given by a port agent who had himself never run the bar in fog. He was relying, as men in his position often do, on the chart and the radar, and the assumption that the channel was where the chart said it was. The channel was where the chart said it was. The bar was where the chart said it was. The spine, the current that ran across the bar at the falling tide, was not on the chart in any way Pavlidis knew how to read. At 6:56, the Coral Erin took the spine. She took it broadside on her port quarter at 2.5 knots of cross-current. Pavlidis felt the stern begin to walk. He gave the helm 12 degrees of starboard rudder. The bow corrected. The stern kept walking. He gave the helm 20 degrees. The bow overcorrected. He brought it back. By that point, the keel had passed over the leading edge of the crescent bar at a draft 3 feet greater than the chart had told him was safe at falling tide. The Coral Erin grounded at 6:58 on the western shoulder of the bar, a quarter-mile inside the bay mouth, in 11 feet of water, and a falling tide that would have her in 8 feet within 90 minutes. The hull did not breach. The cargo did not shift. The general alarm went out at 6:59. The Harbormaster's office at Port Elwood took the call at 7:01. Tamsin Vance, still in the wheelhouse with the videographer, took the call at 7:03. The Harbormaster was a man named Alaric Bruno, 64 years old, 18 years in the chair at Port Elwood, former United States Navy. He answered the radio in the same flat voice he had used for hurricane warnings and a small fishing boat fire, and the morning the Coast Guard helicopter had pulled a kayaker out of the spine. He confirmed the grounding. He confirmed the falling tide. He confirmed the cargo value at $190 million. He confirmed the loss of hire clock at $44,000 per hour. He pulled the operational chart of Crescent Bay and the Harbormaster's call list. He went down the call list. He needed a master 1,600-ton license holder with working knowledge of the spine, on scene in under 30 minutes. There were 3 names on the regional list. 2 were in dry dock training in San Diego, 400 miles south. The 3rd name was at the top of the page. The 3rd name had a small note in his own handwriting beside it that said, "Lives 12 minutes from the terminal." Bruno picked up his phone. He did not call Tamsin. He called the burner. Owen's burner phone was a flip phone he kept in the truck for one reason. The Harbormaster's office knew the number. The License Bureau in Long Beach knew the number. Nobody else did. It had rung 4 times in 2 years. The first time it had been a recovery tow off the spine in a January gale. The second time, a freighter with a steering casualty in the channel. The third, a Coast Guard reservist asking for a deposition. The fourth was that morning. Owen was on the Spit Road, 8 minutes from the apartment, when the phone rang at 7:05. He pulled the truck over onto the gravel. Isaac watched him without speaking. Owen answered on the second ring. He said his name and nothing else. Bruno said, on the other end, "We've got a Panamax on the western shoulder, falling tide, fog under 50 yards. The pilot is foreign flagged and has never run the spine. I need you on the Harbormaster boat in 18 minutes. Owen said, "Understood." He closed the flip phone. He looked at his son. Isaac said, "Dad?" Owen said, "We have to go back to the dock." Owen made one stop. He drove 3 blocks to the apartment, climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, and knocked on Mrs. Esquivel's door. She opened it in her dressing gown. She did not ask. She had seen the look on his face 1.5 times before in 2 years, and she did not need to. She took Isaac's hand. Isaac looked up at his father with the brass compass still in his small fist. Owen knelt down in the hallway. He put both of his large hands on his son's shoulders. He said, "I have to go fix something on the water. I will come back." Isaac said, "Will you find North?" Owen said, "I will find North." Isaac held the compass up. Owen touched the brass with one fingertip, the way a man touches a thing he has been touching for 2 years and 7 months, and does not yet know how to stop touching. He nodded once at Mrs. Esquivel. He went down the stairs. He was back in the truck at 7:13. The Harbormaster boat was waiting for him at Slip 1 at 7:22. He boarded the Harbormaster boat in the same Navy work jacket. Bruno was at the wheel. 2 Coast Guard observers were in the stern with handhelds. Owen took the bench beside Bruno. He did not speak for the first 90 seconds. He watched the fog over the bay. He watched the way the chop ran under the bow. He watched the line of the breakwater come and go in the marine layer. At minute 3, he asked Bruno for the draft, the heading, and the time of grounding. Bruno gave them. Owen nodded once. He said, "We have 40 minutes before her stern hits 8 feet. He said, "We need her on a heading of 112 degrees with her bow into the ebb, and we need her to ride the second south swell off her port quarter at 8:06. He said, "I need the engine room on cold standby until I give the word." Bruno related. The Coast Guard observers wrote it down without comment. 12 minutes after the burner phone rang, the man Tamsin Vance had fired was standing on the bridge of her parent company's $190 million ship. What Pavlidis saw first, when Owen came up the bridge ladder, was a man in his 50s in a wet navy jacket and worn deck boots. What Pavlidis saw second, when Owen produced the master 1,600-ton license from his inside pocket and held it open under the bridge light, was a credential he himself had taken 6 years to earn. He stood up from the chart table. He stepped aside from the helm. He said in his accented English, "She is yours, Captain." Owen took the wheel. He did not speak for the first 30 seconds. He read the gauges. He read the radar. He read the way the hull was already starting to list 1 degree to port as the tide pulled the water out from under her starboard side. He looked at the chart. He looked at the chart again. He set his right hand on the throttle. He set his left hand on the wheel. He said into the bridge intercom, "Engine room, this is the bridge. Stand by for 2 minutes ahead slow on my mark." The engine room confirmed. The Coral Erin's hull let out a long groan against the bar. At 7:51, with the second south swell building under her port quarter exactly the way Owen had predicted, he gave the throttle 2 minutes of ahead slow. The Coral Erin lifted half a foot off the bar at her bow. He gave the rudder 18 degrees of starboard. The bow came around onto 112 degrees. He gave the throttle 1 more minute of ahead slow as the swell passed under the stern. The Coral Erin floated off the spine at 7:53. She did not breach. She did not list. The cargo did not shift. Pavlidis, beside Owen, exhaled a single long breath through his nose and did not speak. The Coast Guard observer on the bridge wing logged the maneuver. The whole sequence had taken 8 minutes from the moment Owen took the wheel. 14 minutes in total from the moment the Harbormaster's call had hit the burner phone. The Coral Erin made her berth at Port Elwood at 8:41. The loss of hire clock had run for 92 minutes. The insurance carrier would later confirm a saved loss of approximately $1.7 million in hire and cargo penalties. At 8:47, while Owen was still on the bridge of the Coral Erin signing the log, the Harbormaster's office sent a 1-line communication to Vance Maritime's Emergency Operations Desk in New York. It read, "Master Owen Bram, USCG, 1,600-ton, license number redacted, refloated MV Coral Erin off Crescent Bar at 0753 local." Tamsin Vance, in her hotel suite at the Harborside Inn, received the email at 8:49. 3 minutes after she had finished editing the morning's content reel. She read it twice. She did not understand the second sentence. She forwarded it to Reeve and asked him, on the phone, who that man was. Reeve, in the lobby of the same hotel, paused. He said, "Ma'am, that is the man you fired at 6:47 this morning." The line was quiet, for a length of breath he would later describe to his wife as the longest professional silence of his career. Tamsin said, in a voice she had not used on the boat, "Get me his address." Owen drove home in his own truck. He did not stop at the apartment first. He stopped at the bakery on the corner of Pine and Crescent, the one Hannah had taken Isaac to on Saturday mornings before the diagnosis. He bought a single cinnamon roll in a paper bag. He drove the last 6 blocks slowly. He came up the stairs. Mrs. Esquivel opened the door before he knocked. She did not ask. She let him in. Isaac was on the couch, with the brass compass on the cushion beside him and a coloring book on his lap. He looked up. He saw his father. He saw the paper bag. He slid off the couch without speaking and walked into his father's arms. Owen knelt down. He held his son for the length of 7 breaths. He did not say where he had been. He did not need to. Isaac said into his father's jacket, "Did you find North?" Owen said, "I found North." Isaac said, "Did the boat go where it was supposed to?" Owen said, "The boat went where it was supposed to." He set the paper bag on the kitchen table. Tamsin Vance arrived at the apartment building at 11:41 with Reeve and no videographer. She came up the stairs herself. She knocked on the door. Owen opened it in his work shirt and undid the latch on the chain. He did not invite her in. He did not close the door. He stood in the doorway with his son visible behind him at the kitchen table, eating the cinnamon roll with both small hands. Tamsin saw the boy. She saw the brass compass on the kitchen table beside a glass of milk. She looked at Owen. She said, "I owe you an apology." Owen did not answer. She said, "I did not understand what I was looking at this morning." Owen said, "I understand." She said, "I would like, if you will let me, to walk back what I said on the boat." Owen said, "You don't need to walk it back. You can leave it where it is." She said, "Then I would like to ask you a different question." She said, "Will you take the route again tomorrow morning?" Owen looked at his son. Isaac did not look up. Owen turned back to Tamsin. He said, "On 3 conditions." He said, "The first is that the deckhand and the mate I worked with this morning keep their watches, with no record of this on their files." Tamsin said, "Done." He said, "The second is that the Harbormaster's report goes into the company record as written, with my license number and the timestamps intact, and that no internal communications are revised." Tamsin said, "Done." He said, "The third is about my son." Tamsin waited. Owen said, "He rides the dawn shift with me, in the high seat in the wheelhouse, every morning I am on. That is the agreement I had with the previous owners, and that is the agreement that does not change." He said, "He gets off at the dock at 7:52, and he is in his classroom at 8:40. He said, "If that is a problem for the brand, then we can shake hands now, and you can find another captain for tomorrow." Tamsin looked past him at the small boy at the kitchen table. Isaac was holding the brass compass against his ear, the way he sometimes did, as if it had a sound. Tamsin said, "He rides every morning you are on." Owen nodded once. He said, "Then I'll take the route tomorrow." He did not extend his hand. He did not need to. The agreement was the agreement. Tamsin stood for a moment in the doorway. She did not leave right away. She said, in a different voice, "May I ask you one thing that is not about the route?" Owen waited. She said, "How long have you held the 1,600-ton ticket?" Owen said, 21 years. She said, "And the canal pilotage?" Owen said, 9 years. She said, "And the ferry?" Owen said, 2 years and 7 months. She said, "Was it a choice?" Owen looked at his son for the length of a breath. He said, "It was a choice." He did not elaborate. Tamsin did not ask. She nodded once. She turned. She went down the stairs with Reeve behind her. She did not look back at the apartment door. In the truck, she did not speak for the length of the drive back to the terminal. Reeve, beside her, did not speak either. The internal review at Vance Maritime took 4 weeks. The findings were never made public. The communications director who had pushed the Dawn content reel was reassigned to a regional office. The 2 influencers were quietly removed from the campaign. The videographer's footage of the firing was never released. Reeve was promoted to chief of staff. The Coral Errands master, Pavlidis, sent Owen a handwritten letter in March on the letterhead of a Greek shipping family Owen had never heard of. The letter said 1 line. It said, "Captain, my children also have a mother. Thank you." Owen folded the letter into the inside pocket of his work jacket. He did not show it to anyone. He kept it there for the rest of his time on the ferry. Vance Maritime announced 6 weeks later a new internal training program for regional pilots in partnership with the Harbormaster's offices of 3 West Coast ports. The training was named, against Tamsin's preference, after the Harbormaster, Alaric Bruno. The first instructor invited to consult on the curriculum was a 52-year-old commuter ferry captain out of Crescent Bay. Owen ran the Dawn ferry the next morning. Isaac was in the high seat with the striped blanket. The fog was thinner than the day before. The crossing was uneventful. The docking at Port Elwood was a 4-inch kiss in a 2-knot wind. Dmitri logged the arrival without comment. Reeve was on the dock. He nodded once. He did not film anything. He did not introduce anyone. He brought Owen a paper cup of coffee from the terminal kiosk. Owen took the cup. He drank a quarter of it. He set it on the rail. He said, "Tell the new owner her ferry is on time." Reeve smiled. He said, "I will tell her." He did not say anything else. The ferry returned to Harborside at 7:52. Owen walked Isaac down the gangway. The brass compass was around Isaac's neck on the leather string. The 3rd knot, the father's knot, was still holding. Isaac's small hand was in his father's. They walked the length of the dock without speaking. They reached the truck. Owen unlocked the passenger door. Isaac climbed in. Owen buckled the belt. He closed the door gently. He drove his son to school. The school was a low, stucco building on the inland side of the Spit Road, with a small playground in the back. Owen pulled into the drop-off lane at 8:36. He turned to his son. Isaac was holding the brass compass in both hands, looking at it. He looked up. He said, "Dad?" Owen said, "Yes." Isaac said, "Did the big boat go home?" Owen said, "Yes, son. It went home." Isaac thought about that. He said, in the small voice he used for things that mattered, "So we did a good thing yesterday." Owen said, "We did." Isaac held the brass compass up between them, in the air between his small face and his father's. He said, "North?" Owen looked at his son for the length of 1 breath. He smiled. He said, "Always north." Isaac smiled back. He opened the door. He climbed down. He walked toward the school building with the brass compass swinging gently from the leather string at his neck. Owen watched him go. The fog was lifting. The bay was opening. He sat with both hands on the wheel for the length of 3 more breaths. Then he put the truck in gear and drove home.